Today we're going to be addressing, or I should say readdressing, a wonderful painting by Diego Rivera. It's a painting that I acquired some time ago, and basically I came to the conclusion that I knew very little about the painting, other than that it was a really beautiful watercolor by Diego Rivera. It was a particularly large piece, which is kind of unusual by Diego Rivera, the format being about 18 3/4 by 23 inches, where most of his watercolors were about 11 by 15 inches. Also the subject matter, this kind of Rural Cantina, and Rural Cantina was the name that we gave to the painting because we didn't know the original name. So other than the fact that I knew it was a very, very beautiful piece, a very rare piece by Diego Rivera, there was really nothing much more I knew about the work, other than it came from a family in Texas. So I decided to contact the world's expert on Diego Rivera, Luis Martín Lozano, who basically gave us a lot more information about this wonderful piece. When I say expert, usually that's a term that's kind of very loosely used, but with Professor Lozano it's very accurate. I was amazed after talking to him for some time, his absolute historical knowledge of Diego Rivera and everything around Diego Rivera, his sense of history, his sense of investigation, the way they catalogued everything so incredibly well over the years. So basically I found a lot more information, very interesting information, which brought the piece more to life for me. He basically found it quite readily within a few days in his archives. And then he gave me a background on the history of the piece. It was painted unequivocally in 1937. From there it went to a small gallery called Centro de Publicaciones. Then that was in Mexico City. In 1944 it was sold to Gimbel's department store in New York, along with 6 other pieces by Diego Rivera. Now department stores quite often in those days would sell fine artwork, these very high-end department stores, so that's what it was sold. From there it was sold to a Texas family before 1955, and then basically it disappears until I acquired it some years ago. So now we've got a very kind of full history of the piece. But not only that, Professor Lozano was able to give me more information about the painting, where it was done and when it was done. Obviously the date was 1937, but he actually told me that it was painted on a ranch when Diego Rivera was traveling by train from Mexico City to Toluca, and that he painted 3 works, probably on a stop over at this ranch from the train. So now we've got a very kind of definite timeline where it was and when it was done. The 2 other pieces were painted at the same time, so as I said, he did 3 works all at the same ranch. When I say Professor Lozano is an expert in many, many different ways, he's also got an incredible eye and understands the aesthetic of painting, which to have all these different kind of talents in one person is quite extraordinary. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read a little bit about his description of this painting. The painting is based on the extraordinary drawing skills of Diego Rivera, where the compositional structure prevails, built with accurate and agile lines through the masterful handling of Indian ink on paper, to later be complemented with a colour palette, accurate and brilliant, that allows one to admire the strokes of the pictorial technique. The application of a few colours is enough to underline the central aspect of the lighting, distinguishing the group of people in the shade who protect themselves from the inclement sun that covers the field, the crops, and from the same chickens that cast their own shadow on the floor. A few and precise expressionist green spots serve to suggest the vegetation on the hill and, at the same time, build a topography that makes the third plane and gives a dimension to the depth of the landscape. This watercolour is a magnificent example of how no detail, however small, escaped the analytical gaze of the master Diego Rivera. So initially, as I said earlier, I knew very little about the piece, other than it was a wonderful, wonderful work by Diego Rivera. Now it's put into context by Professor Lozano, who not only gives a kind of accurate description of when it was painted, how many hands it went through, but also a wonderful kind of aesthetic description of this wonderful work by Diego Rivera.